Good morning, everybody. We are here with Listening with Your Eyes live, and we've had 2 weeks off if you've missed us. Long story, I was in the hospital. Anyway, so couldn't, I was trying to convince my surgeon to do the surgery on a different day other than Tuesday, but they wouldn't have it. So ended up with a couple weeks off, but we are back with a fantastic guest. Raymond Lee is the founder and CEO of Careerminds. And gosh, I met him after some talk that I did for a webinar, and he had reached out, and it has been a wonderful relationship ever since. I love it when I get to introduce people to folks that we've met only virtually through, this was even pre-pandemic. And it's interesting, to have those relationships as well, and that we don't have to only meet people face to face and things like that. So I would love to introduce everybody. Careerminds is an outplacement career transition service, and they do things. They were doing things virtually before a lot of companies were, and they employ a really fantastic group of coaches that work with the folks that are in the interview. And the thing that I love most about Careerminds that I tell everybody about is they don't only work with you through the interview and taking the job, but actually stay with you to make sure that you have success the first couple of months that you take a new job. So there are so many great things that we are going to be talking about today, including company culture and of course body language and interviewing and all those kind of things. So without further ado, I am going to bring Raymond into us. So welcome this morning. Is there anything else about Careerminds you want to tell folks, or obviously they need to know how to contact you, which is probably just looking up careerminds.com. Are you a .com?
We are a .com, Allison, and yeah. I appreciate the introduction. And it's funny that you took us back a year, because when I saw your webinar, I was just thinking about all of these virtual interviews that were happening. And I said to myself, we need some expert who can teach us about how to do all this, virtual interviewing that, is now more of a reality today. So we've had a lot of fun along the way so far, right?
You were ahead of your time. I mean, who knew, right? Back then it was like, this was just sort of becoming the thing, and it would just be the first interview. It wouldn't ever be 3 or 4 interviews in, still virtually, certainly back then when we started. So a great transition then, I guess, would be where do you think we are now? I mean, I've heard a lot of things, chatter going on LinkedIn and other things about the interview process becoming even, I guess, more complicated even now than it had been, or that they're being asked to submit more things to companies as far as writing samples and those sorts of things, or they're on their 4th or 5th interview. And it feels like you hear in the news how nobody can hire anybody, but yet we're having this really long interviewing process. So what's your feeling on what's happening right now in the industry?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that we have our lighting right.
That was one of the first things, right? Make sure we from the front.
We've seen to figure that out. I think it just depends on, the company and what their needs are in terms of, I don't know. It seems like there's this pendulum where it's an employee's market, it's an employer's market. And now, there's companies, there's a labor shortage that we're in. And so I think that there's probably less of the number of interviews, employees have to go through versus when we were in a recession. There's a lot of candidates, and companies are really taking their time, and it does feel like a lifetime, at least the people that we're working with. Right now, people are finding jobs super fast, and I don't think we're seeing the number of interviews that you described in terms of the process. And so, people are happy about that, but there's always that pendulum that shifts, and we're coaching people to be patient, and, it takes time. And sometimes it's 4 or 5 interviews to get to that decision. But, it's all about, though, being, real when you're interviewing, and being prepared, and knowing that you're up against a lot of competition, even when there's a good economy. And so continuing to coach people on just bringing themselves, and I'm sure we'll dive into that. But the pendulum shift, I feel like now is really it's speed, I think, and companies are in a position where they have a lot of job openings, and when they find the right candidates, they're moving quickly.
Well, that's good news for everybody out there. But I think that also means that you don't necessarily have that third or fourth interview to maybe fix some mistakes or things that you wish you hadn't done in the first or second interview. So there's maybe a little bit more pressure on the candidate to make sure that they get it right, each time, or maybe they're skipping the first rung. Maybe they're interviewing with a manager right away instead of, because HR is too busy with other, doing a lot of other things that maybe, so for candidates out there, when you're, obviously be super honest on your resume. Good God, please don't lie on those things. But second of all, the same thing when they can, even virtually, you could tell the difference between genuine and nervous, or genuine movement and I'm faking my answer and I'm faking my movement right now because I don't know how to answer that, or, those sorts of things. And I get asked about and ahs and likes and those sorts of things and how to mitigate that. I was just asked that yesterday. And I said, the power of the pause is great. That's a tip that I would give to everybody is it's okay to take a minute to process the question. Maybe not a minute, 3 or 4 seconds to process the question and even say, let me think about that. That's telling the other person that you're going to be thoughtful about your answer. And maybe you're not just going to pick one of the pre-rehearsed answers that you have, because that's the other thing. Interviewers can really tell the difference between a very pre-rehearsed pat answer that they're trying to hope that you ask a question that they can give that answer for. That's one thing that I get annoyed with a lot of the kind of free service types of job search things that are out there, is I feel like there's a little bit too much pressure or focus on your 15-second introduction or your answers to this or that or the other. It's really great to practice those, but that the practice is so that you could speak them with ease. The practice isn't so that you give them memorized. And maybe that's a misnomer that we should get out there, is they want to still see you as the genuine person. If they don't feel like they're getting you as a person, they're not going to trust. And that's going to be the number one thing that blows the interview. It would be better for you to stumble around and be yourself. In my opinion, it would be better for you to have a couple of missteps, or to say something that doesn't sound as polished, because then you're going to be you, and they want the genuine person because they really want you to be the right person. Most people go in thinking that the interviewer is just there to dash their dreams. And really, the interviewer doesn't want to have to interview 6 people or 10 people or 20 people for the position. They want you to be the right one. So go in there thinking you're the right person for the job, right?
Yeah, there's so lots of stuff there to unpack. First of all, I think you mentioned earlier about the resume and lying on your resume. I think, you have your resume and then you have your LinkedIn profile. And I think today it's probably harder to lie about whether you went to that college or, you worked at that company for 5 years or 20 years, because now, people
it's a
are
little
like,
easier to double check these days.
yeah, right. Like I'd say, Allison, you never worked at that company, or you didn't graduate from blah, 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 blah.
Right. It was a very quick Google search to realize that you.
Yeah, exactly. But, in terms of the answers, I think, like, I oftentimes tell people to have 3 or 4 stories where there's a situation at your company that, really sticks out. And it could be something that you managed, or a project you worked on, or something special that you were a part of. And you go into the interview with 3 or 4 stories, very high level stories. And when the interviewer asks for a specific example, or let's say one of the competencies of that particular job is, leadership or communication or dealing with, conflict or something like that, you can always go to that story, right? And then you can cherry pick the answer that you want to provide. So it's not so much that you have a story memorized, but you already know you already, not the answer, but the story in your mind. And then depending on the situation, you can use that situation and then really tailor your answer to meet specific questions. So the challenge that sometimes people get, I think, is that if you go in with only one or two stories, what is really annoying to me is when I'm interviewing someone and they keep going back to that same story. So you ask the question about conflict and you say, oh, well, I was on this project and I was working with this person and we could never agree to a certain blah, blah, blah. And then they say, okay, so tell me about your communication style. Well, that same project, and you keep going back to the well on that project. And it makes it seem like, is that the only thing you ever did at that company for 20 years? So I'd say get 3 or 4 different stories in your mind before you go in, and I think you'd be in good shape.
Yeah, and that gives you the wealth, for, as you say, for the picking and choosing, how to use the information. And I think that's so key, because I always tell people, you can take the same story, or a lot of what I work on with interview candidates is taking that same story and framing it in a way that fits how the interviewer asked it, or frames it in a way that the interviewer wants to hear the answer.
Yeah.
Because there's your own body language that you're giving off. But as you know, I also teach the other side. How do you read the interviewer, and how do you guide? You're not negating your own style or anything like that, but you are trying to focus your answer in a way that they're most receptive to hearing it. So you take all the body language signals you're seeing from them, and then you say, okay, so this is how I'm going to answer that question, because this is what I could tell is really detail oriented. So I'm going to make sure that I stress the details of that story, or I could tell that this person is very goal oriented. So I'm going to talk about goals and how this particular story matched the goals of the company, or how we exceeded the goals that we had set up before the project started, or something like that. There are things just body language wise that you could tell about your interviewer, and then you can guide your answers a little bit towards them. And that will also help you mirror and kind of mimic their body language as well, because when you're using that kind of language, it'll bring you into their kind of body language style, which is immediate rapport as well. So instead of trying just to mirror their body language, you're actually giving yourself the verbal content as well to have your body do it naturally.
Right.
Which is probably getting into the weeds a little bit, but it's super cool science behind how the body language works. So, it's not only, eye contact and, posture. Please, people, don't sit like this in the interview. Please so, sit up, have good posture.
Are you telling me to sit up, by the way?
Yeah. Okay. Sitting up is always good. I always tell people you need to be able to receive. So if they have any kind of athletic background, I'm always like, the football players, they're there, they're ready, they're on their toes, they're prepared for the hike of that ball into run or whatever. The same thing with the soccer goalie, is prepared and is in front of the goal and is open for whatever is going to come at them. And baseball players out of the field, right? We're ready and we're pumped. Well, they're not ready and pumped, like this. They're ready to catch the ball with their whole body, putting their whole body in front of it if they need to. So that same idea when you're interviewing or when you're public speaking is to stay open, because you'll be able to receive the body language. Your body will take in more, will literally receive more. And you'll also be giving off more to your interviewer. And one of the worst things that somebody can do is be way stiff behind the computer screen, because when you don't move, you're not giving any signals away. And then the interviewer doesn't know what to do because you're sitting in there and you don't know how to read them, because then they only have to go out on your words and they want to go off of a lot of other things. So the best thing you can do is be open and then give off the body language. But this isn't supposed to be all about me. This is supposed to be so I want to ask you about we were talking before we came on a lot about company culture and that sort of trend of not only finding the job description that you like, but finding a company that you're really happy with, because that's part of that work-life balance, and being happy in your career and in your job choices, enjoying the people that you're with and the company culture that you're in. So one of the things that we had been chatting about is, how do you, as a person in the interview, get an idea about the culture of the company? Is there something that you can see or questions you can ask to try to ferret out whether you would like this company or not? Because everybody looks good on their website in general, right? I mean, their videos that they make are sleek and they look great and everybody's happy and everybody's smiling. But how do you get below the surface?
Yeah, hone in. Absolutely. I was just thinking also before our call, when I looked at like turnover from last year, most of the companies that are experiencing turnover, it's because of culture, and people are either leaving the company because of their culture or because of the relationship with their boss or manager. And I think it's really important that in an interview, when you're going through that process and you're answering all those questions at the very end, when the interviewer says, "Hey, do you have any questions for me?" That's your golden opportunity to ask those questions about the company's culture. And, I think just asking them straight out, describe the culture, and literally watch their body language and watch, how they, and I oftentimes will, when I'm interviewing, I'll say, I'm going to be taking some notes. And I think it's important for you to let the interviewer know that you're going to jot down some notes as well. But, ask the manager or your future manager to describe the culture of the company. You could also ask them to share what other employees would say in terms of the culture. How would employees describe the culture? So it's sort of like you're hearing it from your boss or future manager, how they visualize the culture. But then it's interesting, I think, you can obviously go to Glassdoor to find what people say online, but, how would they envision other people describing the culture? So obviously start with that. But then the other thing I think it's important is, if you're interested in what the work is going to be like and what it's going to be like working for that person, asking them, what are the first 30, 60, 90 days going to look like in terms of the work? What am I going to be focused on? What are top priority to you? And again, just sit back and listen, because, if you're going to be spending, the first 90 days training, and then they're going to let you loose after 90 days versus you're going to hit the ground running day one and jumping in with no onboarding and no training, that really kind of gives you a sense of what life's going to be like working for that person, because you're now giving them that opportunity, asking open-ended questions to provide not only what the company culture is going to be like, but what is the working relationship going to be like with the manager. And that's where you can compare opportunities across the board, because I think sometimes people get into they get really excited about the opportunity. Maybe it's the name brand that they're interviewing for or the company, but they don't really dig into literally what's it like working there and what's the manager's expectations of their performance going to be like. And that's where people go in and realize, holy cow, like this facade that I saw online, like you were saying, isn't necessarily reality. And then you go in there and it becomes reality. So, just like, you have your LinkedIn profile and your resume, the interviewer is trying to uncover your reality of like, what's it going to be like when you go working there? Your job is to do the same thing, is to flip it and try to figure out what is reality going to be. And so those direct questions around, don't ask about, what's the pay like and the benefits and all that stuff. Assume those are good. But that's the reason people leave, is because their manager, their boss, or the culture of the company. So anyway, that's my thoughts around that.
Yeah, well, great tips for people to encourage you to go there and ask that. Don't be afraid to ask that question about culture, because you're not going in there to stump them. They should have an answer. And it's a big key to you if they don't have an answer, or if
Right.
they, oh, well, I guess I would say it's that we, if they can't, if they don't already have an answer and they're the ones doing the interviewing, then, that's also kind of a clue. Or, or have that, ask that same question at the end of every interview that you go into with that company, to see how to compare the answers that you're getting, maybe from different levels up the food chain, and,
Right.
things like that. Because, and it also, I always say you can't the reason that you need to be a really great listener is because you can't read the body language of someone else if they're not moving, and they will do the moving when they're talking. So you want to get your interviewer talking. You want to get them at the very beginning. You want them to talk about the company and the position that you're interviewing for. I would say on that kind of interviewing question scale or whatever, don't just go launching right in, which you're going to want to do because you're nervous, and they may say, okay, so tell me about yourself. I think it's okay to say, well, I want to be able to answer that question to the best of my ability for this particular interview. Would you mind going over, I read the job description, but would you mind telling me in your own words what the position is really about, if you don't know, or pretend like you don't know, right? Or the recruiter wasn't sure of this and this. Could you tell me a little bit more about the role so that I'm more prepared to answer, your questions in the best way, or something? Make it, kind of about you, right? I just want to make sure you're answering the questions the best, not that you're getting them talking at first so that you get a read on them. You want to get a read on them and not just launch right into your own thing, and also to remember that people that are interviewing you, they haven't been trained to interview. 9 times out of 10, maybe
sometimes
our team has been given a little bit of training, but most managers that I talk to really haven't been given much training in how to interview. They might have been given a set of questions that every interviewer is supposed to ask or something like that, because they want to keep the interviews, and they're told what they're not allowed to ask, right? Like litigiously what they're not allowed to ask. Legally, you can't ask this and this and this and this. But the actual interview, how to interview and have that conversation and set the person that's coming in at ease, and and those sorts of things, most managers haven't been doing that. And if they're a rather new manager, then you probably assume they haven't done that many interviews either, if they're rather new to their role. So but it's awkward on both sides, and both sides often are nervous at that prospect.
Yeah, when someone asks, tell me, or when someone says, tell me about yourself, like right from the beginning, I always tell them to flip it back to them and say, what would you like to know?
There you go. Exactly.
Like really, it opens up so many
pitfall waiting to happen, right?
Yeah, it's like I was born and raised and blah, 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 and I have a boatload of kids and lots of problems.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just when they ask that, it's like, okay, yeah. So, and that just maybe again, the interviewer thinks they're doing you a service by letting you introduce yourself or whatever. Like by letting,
I think it's
they probably think they're actually making it easier on you, but they're really not. They're making it more difficult because, as you say, you're sitting there going, well, what do you want to know?
Sometimes it's a lack of preparation. They literally, they go from one meeting and it's, top of the hour and they're like, oh, I have this interview. So they're going into their email and finding the resume and they're opening it up for the first time, and they pop open their Zoom call or whatever, and they hop on and they're saying, hey, so-and-so, it's nice to meet you. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
That is so true. Oh, you should do some.
So run for the hills.
Some mock interview videos. That would be hilarious of like how the interview actually goes. Right, you're right, and that's exactly it. They come in, they sit down, they turn around, they open the link, and they very well have only glanced, if that, at your resume, unless or all they know is, yep, got passed on from the last level, and now they're sitting in their inbox queue, ready to go with the next interview. So. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we only have a couple minutes left because I want to respect your time as well. So we kind of said, I had tell everybody that I ask, for your body language, either horror story or success story, because those are usually fun. And you were like, I don't really think I have any horror stories of bad body language, but even, we talked on we touched on a lot of great tips, the eye contact, making sure your lighting is right, that we have the good posture, anything else that you think is either often overlooked or, could be used to, the whole idea of the interview, right, is to in a lot of ways, it's very much like auditioning, because I come from theater background. And so I always tell people during the audition, you just need to be better than the person who read before you. Like, right, your job is just to be that much better to get the call back, or your job is to, right. And it's very similar on the interview process. Your job is to make it to the next round or whatever, but you don't have any control over that. So it's very much like the audition process where people are like, yeah, doesn't fit my vision for the character. And so they've written you off right away. So is there anything that people can do to increase their chances, I guess?
I have to say, as you were talking, I was just thinking about reading the environment and reading the personality style of the person that's interviewing you. For example, sometimes I'll go in meetings and I'll be on a Zoom call, and someone's dog will pop into the call or their cat pops in. And so, I would say if you get into the call and the person that you're interviewing with is like super serious, and, their background is like really professional, and, they're just, they're professional. Not that they're not professional if their dog is hanging out with them, because a lot of, I think that's okay. But you have to just read your interviewer and not necessarily copy what they're doing, but if they're very serious, then you certainly want to make sure that you have no distractions. You're not checking your phone and doing all these other things. Like, you really want to focus in and make sure that that you're there. But if you see that the background has maybe a picture of their kids, or maybe their college diplomas, whatever the case may be, you can sort of read the background. And, if you feel like there's an opportunity for you to, have some connection in some way that you sort of feel is appropriate, then I would say go for it. I think that to the extent you can make that connection, it's certainly going to make you, put you ahead of the others that they're interviewing. So you want to go into it feeling really confident about that and comfortable. And if you do that, then the interviewer is going to, feel that connection. And I think it's hard to connect with someone virtually like this versus being in person and across from a table or a desk. And so I would just be really sensitive to that. And if you do that going in and you try to make that personal connection, then it makes the answers come so much easier. Yeah, I don't have a horror story. I mean, there's certainly lots of them out there online that that we've all seen. AKA take your laptop to the bathroom. Yeah, but I don't know. I think you said some really good things, Allison, earlier, in terms of the pausing and voice inflection. And, even if you want to make a point, maybe you come in and bring them into your point, because those will elicit emotion that they do when you're in person. And so, that deliberate, sort of answers that you're providing, I think, are really key. And, will put you ahead of the competition. So.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, breathe before it comes on, breathe during. Can't stress that enough. Like, if you stop breathing, your voice will tense up, your body will tense up, and all of that. So even if you're just there, you're just take a breath and pause before you answer something, and get your composure back if you feel like you're slipping, or the phone rang, in the other room or whatever. Most people, those things don't bother people as much as we worry about, I think, maybe these days. Obviously, watch the reaction of the interviewer and see how annoyed they are. But in general, as you say, it's a lot about reading the room and reading what's happening. So, and there goes a phone in the other room.
I just heard that.
Yes, yeah.
What are if I have to ask though, what are your thoughts about two things? What about apologizing for it? Should you? Let's just say you've done everything that you can do to control your environment. You put the dog in the crate, you put a sticky note on the sign to your Amazon delivery person not to ring the doorbell. You told your kids don't run in, it's summer and the kids are probably home. Let's just assume that it doesn't happen, and someone walks in or something happens. do you apologize and say, hey, I'm so sorry for that? Or do you just pretend it never happened and you just continue with the interview, knowing that it's just very temporary?
I think it somewhat depends on the level of interruption in some ways. But I personally, I am usually the proponent of acknowledging whatever it is that happens, right? So, in that instance, my parents are visiting and I didn't even think about silencing their phones, right? I mean, silence my phone.
Shame on you.
Main telephone is shut off, all the things that I normally do, but my parents are visiting, so I didn't even think about their phone. So, but yeah, so acknowledging it, I think, in that kind of sense, you could even say, I made sure that my mother was here to watch the kids today so we could have quiet during our interview. And of course, her ringer goes out there. There it goes again, because somebody is texting on the text that has just come. So, acknowledging it, I think, is fine. Because I think it is a common thing now. So everybody could sort of laugh about it. Or then if it happens on the other side, too, it also opens it up that if something would happen on your side, the cat jumps in front of the screen or whatever, it becomes part of the, this is the crazy life we lead or something. And yeah, I think you acknowledge it quickly and move on. You don't have to blubber about it or overly apologize. And I think I would just acknowledge it and call it what it is without necessarily even apologizing, unless it's, I don't know, like your child wandering in naked might need an apology versus, the diaper is hanging off of them or something. You might be a little bit further than just, the doorbell ringing or something like that. If you do have, dogs that hate the UPS man and they're just going to go off and, and it's going to be a huge deal, then make sure you put the note on the doorbell. Please don't ring the doorbell. But everybody.
Well, the reality, though, I guess the learning lesson here is that I've often hear people say, past performance is the best predictor of future performance, right? So just know that if you're interviewing for a company and a job, and the expectation is that your office is separate from the rest of the house, and the expectation is no distraction, right? Know that if that distraction occurs, that could knock you down a couple of points, and so just know that, because if it happens in the interview, there,
right?
It's
and
maybe happen
you
in the
even
job.
start. I don't know if you would even say, you could also preempt. See, there it goes again. Anyway, we could preempt in some ways too, I suppose. Sometimes if I'm getting on a virtual thing, and it is summer or something, I'll be like, okay, the kids are home. I told them to be, to be quiet. Mine are old enough that really they do know how to be quiet. But, so I don't know whether you would necessarily do that in an interview process. You would try to, of course, keep yourself as clear as possible. It may even just be saying, well, it's a good thing that we're back in the office. Like, if they're back in the office, you could almost in that way, remember, this isn't going to be the way it is when you hire me, right?
Right.
I'll be in the office and the kids will be in daycare. Don't worry, or something. It's, you never know, and we just have to be honest and genuine. And part of it would be also the grace of which you handle it, right? If it wrecks the entire interview and you can't move on from it, that says more to me. If I were the manager, oh, I don't know, we have kind of testy meetings sometimes, where people just say what they believe, or we challenge ideas here. And if this person can't even get over, the doorbell ringing without falling apart, I don't know whether they're a good fit for this, right?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. That describes the culture. I have to say that one BBC interview where the expert was giving whatever their advice on something or sharing some report, and in his office, the baby
opens
comes
the
in
door
and
the mom or the parent comes in to grab him, sorry and everything. I mean, those were classic.
Too funny.
And that was where we were, and and some it's going to continue for some, and some people are probably looking for those work from home scenarios. So if that's the case, then obviously the honesty with the employer about what your work from home situation is like, is probably going to be one of the questions that they ask you, right? It'll probably come up in the interview as far as your situation. Do you have a private office, or can you close the door?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Oh, well, this has been so fun. I so enjoy talking with you about all of this. I know we gave a lot of great tips and content. So all of you people out there that weren't asking questions, you were just absorbing, and I'm going to get lots of notifications later. That's always what happens. We're like, oh, I saw the link. It's like comment during the stream, which, or they watch it later. So if you are catching us late in the stream, or if you're watching the replay, make sure that if you're in any kind of position to be laying off folks or doing some kind of massive something with the company, and you need that advice from an outplacement service, and you want that service for your employees, because as we know how they leave the company and their feelings when they leave the company, as you mentioned earlier, they're going to go to Glassdoor and they're going to write about it. So you want to make sure that their experience is a good one. And we know for sure that Careerminds provides really great service with fantastic coaches to ease that transition and to really make your company, a hero in that regard, where somebody says, you know what, there were layoffs, but let me tell you, they really took care of me, and it was a much better experience than I thought. And now I've moved on, and I'm in even a better position than I was before. You want those kinds of stories to be out there about your company. You don't want, oh my gosh, they just let the axe, and we were all let go in 2 weeks. We didn't know what was happening. So definitely reach out, careerminds.com, and they're happy to talk to you. Otherwise, I think next Tuesday we'll be back on track. The rest of the summer we're doing best ofs. So I will be choosing snippets from the different interviews, and we'll be talking about them, or we'll be bringing up fun things like interviews that people have on Letterman or something like that. No, he doesn't have a show anymore. The night shows, which are so fun, right? So we'll pick something out, Jimmy Fallon or somebody's interview, and we'll talk about their guests, because those are always fun. So we'll be doing fun stuff over the summer as well, all based on body language and making sure that you're listening with your eyes as you are moving on, whether it be job transition or managing your own company. So thanks so much, Raymond, for being here, and we'll end the broadcast.
Thank you.
Have a great day.